students of class 9, welcome to yet another fun-filled session of English only on Classroom TV. Today we are going to start off with a poem, and the name of the poem is A Legend of the Northland. A Legend of the Northland. So please open your textbooks, your Beehive textbooks, to page number 65. Now, this poem here is called a ballad. Now, what is a ballad, guys? A ballad, it is a song. It's a song which tells a story. So, a ballad is a song which tells a story. So, this story here is presented in the form of a song or a poem. What are poems, guys? Poems are songs, right? In other words, yeah? So, here we have a ballad. A ballad contains a story and it's presented as a poem or as a song. And this one, ballads have short stanzas. And our particular poem here, it has very short stanzas. Each stanza has only 4 lines. Okay, so short stanzas. Ballads are part of folk culture and popular culture. That means when it comes to folk culture or popular culture, everybody in the village or in the city or in the town, they know about it. That is what popular culture or folk culture is all about. Okay, it is a story that has been just passed down, and it may not be true. It may not be true at all, but the story, it has been passed on. For example, I'll tell you a story that I have heard when, I was a young girl. Well, have you ever seen babies smile when they're sleeping? Have you heard that? Have you seen that? Babies, they smile when they're sleeping. And, one of my aunts, I don't know how true it is, but she told me, why babies are actually smiling? That's because God has told the angels to whisper something in their ears. And what they're whispering is, they're whispering some kind of tasks that the baby can do. So the baby is, up and awake, and inside, in the mind, the baby is awake. And the baby is, performing the tasks that have been given by God. And that is why the baby is smiling while it is asleep, is what, it's just a folk tale. It's popular as far as folk tale is concerned, but it's not real. It may not be real. I don't know. Yeah. So here, ballads, they are part of folk culture or popular culture, and they're passed on from one generation to the other generation orally. So that means, that my aunt, the story that she told me, I can narrate it to my children, and my children can narrate it to their children. And this folk tale, it passes on. So ballads, they are part of folk tales, and ballads are passed on. These songs are sung, and people who listen to these songs understand the songs. And of course, one generation sings that song, and it gets passed on to the next generation and to the next. Yeah. So that's how they're passed on orally from one generation to the other generation, next generation. A Legend of Northland here, it's a ballad, and this ballad is written by, the poetess here is Phoebe Cary. Phoebe Cary. Phoebe Cary, she is an American poetess, and her sister is Alice Cary, and both of them, guys, they write. They used to write. And their poems have been published in the year 1849. It was co-published. That means both their poems were published together. Stepmother, they had stepmother, guys. And this stepmother, she didn't allow them to study. She didn't like the fact that they were pursuing their, studies. Because they studied on their own, guys. They didn't go to a college. They studied on their own. And the stepmother didn't like it. So the stepmother said, no, you have to go ahead and work at home. You have to take care of the household duties. Well, these two girls were bright and intellectual, and they wanted to study. They had, they had that determination to study. Therefore, what they did is, during the day, they would work. They would do everything that their, stepmother tells them to. They used to do that. And then finally, during the night time, during the evening time, they would sit and study. Phoebe Cary and Alice Cary. Okay. So this is about our poetess here and her sister. So let's go ahead and deal with the poem here. A Legend of the Northland. What is a legend, guys? And a legend is a very popular story. It's an old It's an old and popular story. That means a very famous story. Popular. It's old. It's passed on. It's a ballad, right? Yeah, anyway, so that is what legend means. So there is a legend that is prevalent in the Northland, and let's learn about the legend today. Let's see what is this legend all about. What is this old and popular story that has been passed on from generation to next generation? Let's see what this story is all about. Let's first go ahead and read the poem. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny, furry clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true. 'Tis true. And yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, you know, he came to the door of a cottage and traveling round the earth where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So she made a very little cake, but as it was baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Therefore she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked when she turned it over as the first had done. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it first and baked it thin as a wafer, and she couldn't part with that. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard, dry wood. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed into a bird. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. And every schoolboy has seen her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Okay, so let's go ahead with the line by line explanation of this particular long ballad. Yeah, it's a long ballad. So, it is a long poem, but it has very short stanzas. Now, let's do the first stanza. Away, away in the Northland, far away in the Northland. Now, what is the Northland, guys? This is our Northland, our, where we have the North Pole. Yeah, not many people go there, guys. Only explorers usually visit that place because it's too stinking cold. Well, around the North Pole, we have this land area. Do you see that? Yes, Russia, Alaska, Canada, Greenland. We have a few countries there. We have a few places there at least. And those places can refer to the Northland. We are not sure where exactly it is, but somewhere over here there is a legend that has been passed on. And far away, guys, far away in the Northland, way up there, yeah, way up there, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Well, in the North Pole, in the Northlands, the days are very, very short and the nights are long. Yes, if you know it or not, our earth, it revolves around the sun in a tilted manner. And because of this tilt, we have winters and summers. And because, the tilt is too far away from the sun, at that point, a part of the land is experiencing, a part of the earth is experiencing winter. Here, the northern hemisphere is leaning away from the sun. It's leaning away from the sun, very far away from the sun. The northern hemisphere is leaning away from it. And that is why the days are shorter and the nights are longer. During winters, what happens, guys? By 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, it's, you don't have daylight anymore. You don't have sunlight anymore because of the winter time. So in the Northland, the days are shorter and the nights are longer, and people are tired of sleeping and they cannot sleep them through. So throughout the night, if the night is like, for 12 or 13 hours, they're unable to sleep for such a long time. How long is, our night, guys? Somewhere around 7 o'clock, the sun sets. Yeah, if it's winter, 6 o'clock. If it is summer, 7:30. And let's talk about winter, guys. 12 hours we have night time, where, the sun is not shining. So in the Northland, maybe for 18 or 19 hours, the sun is, not shining at all. I'm not sure of the number, but here the days are long and the nights are short, and people are unable to sleep the entire night because of such a long time. Well, in that land, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bear cubs in their funny furry clothes. So here we see that a reindeer, this is a reindeer, guys, and a reindeer, it is swift. Swift means it is very, very fast. And this reindeer, it is harnessed to a sledge. This here is a sledge. And this can, go around on the snow. This can move on snow. So the reindeer, it is harnessed to this sledge. So there is something that ties the reindeer to the sledge. So when it's snowing, guys, when it is winter time, they use these reindeers to move around in Northland. And the children who are actually in the sledges, they look like bear cubs. Look at this little girl here. She looks like a bear cub. She looks so cute and so, full. Yeah, she looks so full. She looks big. She looks thick. Why? Because she's wearing furry clothes. She's wearing clothes that are made of thick hair. So she's wearing clothes here that are made of thick hair, and that is why she looks very, very funny and furry, like a bear, like a bear's cubs. Cubs are bear's babies. Babies of a bear are called cubs. So they look very, very cute, the children. They tell me a curious story. I don't believe it is true, and yet you may learn a lesson. I'll tell the tale to you. Now, the poetess, she's saying that they tell them a story. They tell the children, the people who live in Northland, they tell their children a story, a curious story, a strange story. I don't believe it is true. Now, the poet is saying, I don't believe tis. Tis means it's. Okay? It is otherwise. Okay, so I don't believe it is true, and yet you may learn a lesson. But because you may be able to learn a lesson from the story, I will tell the tale to you. Tale means story. Okay? So the people in Northland, they tell their children a story, a strange story. And the poetess just says that I don't believe that story is true, but I will go ahead and tell you the story because you may learn a valuable lesson. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, So, once, when a story is told, you start off by saying, once upon a time. So, once upon a time, very, very, a long time ago, once upon a time, there was a man named Peter, and he was a good saint. He was a good saint. A saint is someone who, is religious and who carries out religious duties. So here we have Peter, and Peter, he's a good saint. And he lived on this earth, and while he was living in this earth, he walked around the entire earth. He was preaching wherever he went. What does preach mean? Preach means to teach a certain religion, religious belief system. Now, Saint Peter, he's a Christian, so he preached Christianity to the world. So he was traveling in the world, and he was preaching to everyone. He was preaching about Christ to everyone, just as he did. We all know that he did. Okay, we all know who Saint Peter is, and we know that Saint Peter, he went around the world preaching, and just like, what he did, he was going around the world preaching. At that time, what happened was, he came to the door of a cottage and traveling around the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Now this here, you see, this is hearth. Now he saw that, there was a small hut, a small house, that's called a cottage. So he saw the small cottage there, and he went to the door, and at the door he saw that there is a little woman there, a little woman, and this little woman, she was making cakes. Let's not think about the cakes that we have nowadays, guys. Not the cakes that you find in the bakery, but those are loaves of bread. So he saw this woman making cakes and baking them on the hearth. So he was traveling all around the earth. He was very tired. Finally, he came to this small house where there lived a small woman, and she was making cakes. So he wanted to have some of it, because the smell that you get from baking a cake, guys, it's too good. Yeah? You cannot resist it. And being faint with fasting. Faint means weak. So here we see that Peter was weak because he hadn't eaten anything. Faint with fasting, for the day was almost done. So since morning, okay, he has been roaming around, he has been preaching to everyone, and now it's almost, now the day is almost done. So he has been preaching for many hours now. He has been traveling around the earth, traveling around different places. So now he's very, very tired. He's weak because he hasn't eaten anything. He asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So he said, "Are you baking cakes? Yeah, you're making and baking cakes. Can I have one, because you have so many of them? Can I have one of your cakes, please?" Is what good Saint Peter had asked this lady over here. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. So what she did was she began making that cake. And while she was making that cake, she felt that cake was a bit big. The reason she was actually making a cake was that, she was thinking, it's only one man. How, why would he need a big cake? Let me make a small cake. So, she took the flour, she kneaded it, she rolled it. Yeah, she did everything that she needs to do to bake a cake. And when she was actually baking that cake, what happens to the dough, guys? It becomes bigger, right? It becomes fluffier. And she saw that, oh my, this cake is as big as the previous one, as big as the other cakes that I have. Well, I don't want to give this big cake to him. No way, no way. So what she did, therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked, when it turned over, as large as the first one. So she said, oh, he cannot have this big one. Let me need another one. Let me make it a bit more smaller, because I don't think, he needs to have such a big one. He's just one man. So she took some more flour. She began to knead it. Where, what is kneading, guys? You add some water in, and then you knead that dough. So she began to knead the dough. And while she was, after she finished kneading the dough, she took only a little bit, guys. She took only a little flour, added some water, she kneaded it. She wanted it to be a very small one. But what happened? When she turned it over, when she was baking it in the hearth, she saw that it was, it was almost as same as, similar to the other one. So she did not give the first one, because, she did not give what she had in the store because she thought that they were too big. She began to make the cake. The first one, she thought it was as big as the previous one. The second one, when she thought, when she started to bake, she, thought that it was as big as the previous one. Well, let's see. Then she took a tiny scrape of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as wafer, and she couldn't part with that. So what she did, she took a little piece of dough, little piece of dough, and she rolled it, she rolled it like how you roll it with your rolling pin. She rolled it and made thin wafers without any kind of, much dough in it. So it wouldn't become thick. It wouldn't fluff like a usual cake would. So here she made it as flat as possible, as thin as a wafer. But even those thin wafers, she couldn't part with them. She couldn't part. That means she couldn't give it to Peter. She said, I can't give it to Peter. No way. Now, for she said, my cakes that seem too small, when I eat of them myself, are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. She said, when I actually eat my cakes, I think that they're too small. I feel like, that they won't be sufficient. They won't be enough for me. But now when I'm actually having to give these, give one of the cakes to another person, I feel like, it's too much. I feel like my cakes are bigger. That's what happens, right? When it comes to sharing, guys, when we have something and when we have to share, we feel like that's not enough. For example, let's take 1,000 rupees. 1,000 rupees is a very good amount of money. And when someone asks you to share that 1,000 rupees, you feel like, it's only 1,000 rupees. At the beginning, you felt that it was a lot. Then later on, when you actually have to, part with it, you say it's not much anymore. So similar thing was happening over here. The lady, when she actually made cakes and when she ate for herself, she felt that they were too, that they were not enough. Now when she had to give it to somebody else, she thought that, they were too big for her to give it to somebody else. So that means we see that she was a stingy woman. She was a Scrooge. She didn't want to share. She's a miser. Then good Saint Peter grew angry. So here we have this good person who became very, very angry. For he was hungry. Now why was he angry? Because he was hungry. He was actually a good person. Okay? But this good person, he became angry because he was hungry and weak, faint. He was hungry and he was fainting, and that is why he grew very angry. And surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. So though he was a saint, though he was a very good man who was known for his religious deeds and ideas, yet this kind of woman was enough for a man such as Peter to be provoked. Why? Because this woman was a miser. She was stingy. She was selfish. And selfish women or selfish people, guys, so anyone who, meets a selfish woman, they can easily get angry. So here we see that this good old man got very angry because of this lady who provoked him. What does provoke mean? What does provoke mean? To make someone very angry is called provoking. And he said, you are far too selfish. You are far too selfish. That means you are very, very, very selfish. Okay, you are very, very selfish. To dwell in human form. You are in human form, and being a human, you're so selfish. So this lady, guys, she had all basic necessities of life. She needed, what does a human need? A human needs food and shelter, and she also has fire to bake her cakes. Yeah, it's her living. That's how she makes a living. That's how she makes money, by baking cakes, by making and baking cakes. And she needs fire for that. So the good old saint, he says, come on lady, you are a very, very, very selfish woman to be in a human form. As a human, you have food, you have shelter, and you have fire to make your cakes, to bake your cakes, to sell them and to make more money. And now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. Now here, our dear Peter has cursed the woman. And Peter said that because you have, you were not ready to share, because you have been selfish, you will build like the birds do. Now birds, they build their nests. And to build their nest, they don't build it all together at once, guys. They, they bring one twig, another twig, yeah? Little by little, one by one. So just like the birds, you will also build your house. That means you will become a bird now. And birds don't get, huge amounts of food. They eat very scanty. Scanty means less. Very less food. Because you have been selfish. Because you were not sharing. You had so much food with you. But when it comes to giving to someone else, you are not ready to share. Therefore, the same thing will happen to you. Now, like a bird, you will build your nest. One by one, little by little. Like a bird, you'll only eat little, very scanty, not much. By boring and boring all day in the hard, dry wood. So, I don't know if you know it or not, but there is a bird called woodpecker, and this woodpecker, it bores. Bores is to, drill a hole in any kind of a tree. So here we have a woodpecker, it's making a hole into the tree. Here we see that Peter has turned the woman into a bird. But before he turned the woman into a bird, he's telling her that you will become a bird very soon. Just like a bird, you will build your house. Just like a bird, you will eat only little. Just like a bird, you will bore and bore and bore into the hard, dry wood. All this, all throughout your life has been very, very easy, very smooth, very, very soft. But from now onwards, it'll be hard and dry. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. So she was in the house, yes. And now from the chimney, now here we have the chimney. This is the chimney. And she came out of the chimney. She came out of this house through this chimney. She never spoke a word. Birds don't speak. And out of the top flew a woodpecker. This here is a woodpecker. And that lady, she was changed to a bird. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burnt, black as a coal in the flame. Now this lady over here, she was wearing a cap, and this cap was red in color. Now while she was, coming out of the chimney, now what is there, guys? Below the chimney you have a fireplace. Yes, so her clothes, they got burnt in the fireplace. While she was coming out of the chimney, her clothes got burnt. Her cap stayed the same. It was red in color, and her cap also stayed red in color. So she had a scarlet cap on. See the scarlet cap? Scarlet means red. So she had a red cap on her head, and that was the same, guys. There was no change in the cap, but the rest of the clothes, they were burnt, and her body, it became black as flame. So woodpecker, guys, it is black in color with a red head. And it bores and bores and bores all day. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. So everybody in the country, country here means village. So every village school boy, they have seen this woodpecker, and they have seen this woodpecker living in the trees, and this woodpecker, it bores and bores all day for food. So whenever they see a woodpecker, the parents would say, see, look at that woodpecker. That woodpecker was once upon a time a selfish woman who was not ready to share her bread, who was not ready to share the cakes that she made. And that is the reason Saint Peter had cursed her, and now she has become a woodpecker. Now that is a story, a popular folk tale that has been passed on from one generation to another generation. And that's what ballads are all about. Okay, so I hope you understood this poem. It's a very small, short, interesting and easy poem. It's a ballad that has been written by Phoebe Cary. Now let's go ahead and discuss the poetic devices or the literary devices that we have in our poem here. So our literary devices, the first one is the rhyme scheme. If you actually look at the rhythm, there's a lot of rhythm in the poem because it's a song. A ballad is a song. So here you have a lot of rhythm. Look at the last sound, guys. It is oi, ud, a, food, ud. So A, B, C, B. The same rhyme scheme, guys, is for the rest of the poem, but I'll go ahead and do this particular stanza for you. My cakes that seem myself away and shelf. A, B, C and B. So the rhyme scheme, guys, of this particular poem is A, B, C, B. All the stanzas. Repetition. Now the next poetic device that has been used in the poem is repetition. Now in the very first stanza, we have the word away and away. Repeated. Away, away. It means far away. What is the poetic device repetition used for? To lay emphasis, to stress on something. And what are we stressing here on? The poetess wants to stress that away and away means very far away in the Northland. So here we have a poetic device used, and that is repetition. In this particular stanza, by boring and boring and boring. That means you'll be doing it continuously without any stop. And in order for you to actually eat your food, you need to bore. You have no other go. Okay, so here that is the curse, and that is the intensity of the curse. It's not a simple curse. You have to bore and bore and bore. So the emphasis is on the kind of curse that the little woman has been put under. Another one, guys. Yes, rolled and rolled. She took a tiny scrap of dough and she rolled it and she rolled it and she rolled it. She was rolling it with a rolling pin. And she made sure that it was very, 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 very thin. So the emphasis here is on what, guys? The emphasis is on how stingy she is. So that is why the poetic device repetition has been used. Okay. The next poetic device is simile. And what is a simile, guys? A simile is where you have the usage of like or as, and you're comparing one to another. You're comparing and you're saying that something is like something or is not like something. So let's go ahead and look at the similes that are used in the poem here. The children look like bear's cubs. So here the children, the way they look, their appearance is compared to the way a bear's cub looks. A bear's cub looks big. A bear's cub looks cute. It looks cute. It looks fluffy. And that's how these little kids with their funny furry clothes looked. Okay, so here the children are compared to bear's cubs. So this here is a use of simile. Another one, guys. She baked it as thin as a wafer. So, a simile uses words such as like or as, and here, how did she, roll that piece of dough? She made it as thin as a wafer. So here, the dough here, that scrape of dough is compared to that of a wafer. To as how a wafer is thin, and when you put a wafer in your mouth, it easily dissolves because it is very, very, very thin. And that is how she made the dough. That's how she rolled it. And finally here, as black as coal. When someone is very, very dark, they say as black as coal, which is not, which is not nice, but yeah. So here, the woodpecker's skin, the woodpecker's feathers, they are as black as coal. So her clothes were burnt and in the flame, and her feathers have become as black as coal. So the use of simile is seen over here. Then the next one is anaphora, and anaphora is where you have the same word repeated in the next line. At the beginning of the line and at the beginning of the next line, you have the same word repeated. So here we have 2 and 2 repeated. So the line here is beginning with 2, and the next line is also beginning with 2. So the use of anaphora is seen over here. Another one is enjambment. An enjambment is where you don't have a punctuation mark after your line. The thought is continued to the next line, and that is what enjambment is. So in this stanza, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring, the thought is continued to the next line. So here we have enjambment, and enjambment, guys, it is seen in many different stanzas in this particular poem. You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form. There is no use of punctuation here. That this here is enjambment again. This here, guys, in this paragraph, every line ends with the punctuation mark. So enjambment is not used over here. So you can check for yourself the rest of the poem and try to find places where the line ends without a punctuation mark. That's where enjambment is in use. Okay. And finally, we have alliteration. Alliteration is where a consonant sound is repeated. Okay. So we have many such examples, guys, in this poem. That, they, the. So this sound, this consonant sound, the, is repeated, guys. Next, funny, furry, fur, look, like, l. So you see that the consonant sound, any consonant sound, if it's repeated in the next word or in the same line, if it's repeated over and over again, that is called alliteration. The repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning, guys. At the beginning. Tell, tail, t. Then woman, was, wa. Baking them on the hearth, them, and the. The sound the is repeated. Faint, fasting, fur. You can go ahead and read the stanzas, guys, and try to understand the same sound that has been repeated in 2 or 3 words. If you have a line and if you have a repetition of a consonant sound, then that is alliteration, and you can go ahead and do that for yourself. But these are a few poetic devices that have been used in the poem here. So let's work on our question and answers before we finish off our class. Which country or countries do you think the Northland refers to? Well, we are not sure of the name of the country, but it refers to a place where the days are short and the nights are long. But if you want to give a name, you can probably say Greenland or Alaska or Canada. Russia. Remember the place I showed you? Yes. What did Saint Peter ask the old lady for? What was the lady's reaction? Saint Peter, he asked her for cake. And the lady, she was not willing to share her cakes. How did he punish her? He punished her by cursing her. He punished her by turning her into a woodpecker. How does a woodpecker get its food? It has to bore and bore and bore. Yes, the hard wood. Do you think that the old lady would have been so ungenerous if she had known who Saint Peter really was? What would she have done? Yes, if she had known that he was Saint Peter, she wouldn't have been so selfish. She would rather give him a lot of food so that she can get something in return. But remember, guys, never respect a person because of the way he or she looks, or because of the way he or she, because of what he or she is. Don't respect people based on their appearance or based on who they are. Is this a true story? No, it's not a true story. Which part of the poem do you feel is the most important? Well, it depends upon you guys. Yeah, I think, the part that she was changed to a bird is important, I think. What is a legend? A legend is an old popular story that has been passed on from one generation to the other generation. Why is this poem called a legend? Because this here is a story that has been passed on from one generation to another generation. It is an old and popular story. Write the story of a legend of the Northland in about 10 sentences. The same story, guys, that Saint Peter comes to a certain woman's house to ask for cakes, and this lady was stingy. She wouldn't give him those cakes. She does bake, but then she feels that those cakes are too big to share, and therefore this man Saint Peter gets very angry and he curses her and he changes her into a woodpecker. Let's look at the words at the end of the second and fourth lines, that is snow and clothes, true and you, below and no. We find that snows rhymes with clothes, true rhymes with you, and below rhymes with no. Find such more rhyming words. Well, when we look at the rhyme scheme, the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B. So identify all the words that have BB rhyming, guys. Then you can answer that question there. Go to the local library or talk to older persons in your locality and find legends in your own languages. Tell the class these legends. So you can do it for yourself. Try to find stories, guys, that are passed on from one generation to another generation. And do send us a video if you would like to. And we will surely air it on our screens here. Okay, so guys, next time when you see someone and when someone needs help, go ahead and help them out, because you don't know whom you're helping. And don't get deceived by the way they look, and don't think about who they are. Don't let appearances deceive you. Well, whoever, even if it's a beggar, go ahead and help them. Or even if it's the greatest person, go ahead and help that person. So don't think about who it is. So next time, guys, when you see someone, when you meet someone, and when someone asks you for help, will you help them? Good. Go ahead and help them out. And likewise, go ahead and watch us always on Classroom TV.